Okay, so today we're going to talk about dynamic audio processing. For any of you that have seen me do some of these webinars over the past, oh God, Dan, it's been what, 3 years, almost 4 years now. Goodness,
2022. So yeah, 4 years.
goodness, almost 4 years now. 3.5 years. Anyway, um, you will know that I came from an audio heavy background. So I was a DSP programmer before I ever started doing anything in control. And as such, when Dan and I were going through and creating some new classes, I decided this would be a fun one to do. So this is dynamic audio processing. So what we're going to talk about are some of the lesser known and lesser used blocks, but the ones that can really get you into trouble if you don't know exactly what you're doing. So we're going to cover things like compressors, limiters, expanders, gates, and then I'm going to go through two of my favorite blocks, which are the automatic gain control and the continuous ambient compensation. Once we kind of go through a little bit of terminology, I'm going to jump into Designer and kind of show you guys how these blocks work, what all the knobs mean, all of that kind of fun stuff, just to help give you another arrow in the quiver when it comes to setting up a DSP. So here we go. All right, what is dynamic audio processing? So it's important to also know what the dynamic range is. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the level of a sound over the course of its lifespan. So you'll see here that we have these high peaks in our audio. We also have some low peaks in the audio. The difference is what we call the dynamic range. And that is what we are looking to affect with these processors. So let's talk about the types of audio processing. For the most part, the name pretty much tells you what it is going to do. So this is going to be our four main types: our compressors, our limiters, our gates, and our expanders. Like I said earlier, we will also cover automatic gain control and CAC. When you get into these blocks, there will be a lot of controls that you will see that will help you nail down exactly how this block is going to behave. Most of them use a similar style terminology, so I wanted to go through those with you before we get into them. The first of which is the threshold. At what level are we going to begin to affect the signal? This is super tied into your gain structure. So if you've gone through the gain structure class before, please use all of those tips and tricks before you ever get into this. Otherwise, you will have a really hard time getting your dynamic audio processing to work properly. The depth. So when we're talking about compressors and expanders, this is going to be the maximum amount of attenuation that we will apply to the signal. In a gate, this is going to be negative gain applied when we are below the threshold that we just discussed. The ratio. This is going to be the ratio between the input and the output as it is measured from the threshold level. So the closer you are to 100, the smaller dynamic changes in the output will be. As the ratio gets closer to 1, the dynamic range of the output will increase. So once you get to a ratio of 1 to 1, the block is not doing anything. So as we go through and we're talking about when we get above our threshold, how much do we want to affect the signal? That's where our ratio is going to come in. So if we're talking about, a ratio of, 5, then we'll say that, okay, for every 5 dB that we go above the threshold, we're going to change this by 1 dB. The soft knee. So this is when we talk about certain blocks as that signal transitions above and below the threshold. Um, this is a way to spread that attenuation above and below the threshold. There are certain blocks where you will want to smooth out what it sounds like coming out of the block. So this is where the soft knee can come into play, just so that it's not so abrupt when the block hits. Now, there are certain blocks that we want to be abrupt, things like a gate or a limiter. We want those to just hit or not. Like those are just very much binary. The soft knee lets things like an expander, become a little more analog. It's a little bit smoother as we make that transition. The attack time. Um, this is the amount of time that it takes for the block to kick in and attack the signal. More technically, this is the amount of time that the block takes to get back to 63% of the threshold level. That is just so you know that if you're looking at attack times, it is not necessarily the amount of time it takes to get to 100%. It's really just getting us, it's how long does it take for us to get most of the way there. Once you get to about 63%, everything from there on out, you're not really going to hear. So that's why the attack time is such that it is. The release time. This is the opposite of the attack time. This is how long it takes for the block to release the signal or stop working. Again, it really has to do with that 63% threshold level. Hold time. Certain blocks will allow you to hold the applied gain for a certain amount of time once the signal drops below the threshold. This is how gates and AECs, or sorry, AGCs, can sort of smooth out their operation a little bit. Especially with gates, if you're bouncing right up against that threshold number, you don't want to hear it chopping in and out. So you may put on a hold time, meaning that it's got to drop below for half a second, something like that, before it will actually slam the gate shut. Detector time. This is a way to delay the detection of the signal above or below the threshold. Um, Again, it's just to help you smooth out the behavior. It'll let you adjust the time so that you don't have some momentary spikes or dips that'll activate the block. In some of the blocks, this is an actual this is a value in the properties, so that is a design time change. However, there are several of them that you can change that to user controlled, which means you can do it runtime. All of the blocks that I will show you today have the user controlled version turned on. Um, and those are kind of highlighted. But if you were to set that static, that control just would not appear in the block. All right, on to the demo. I'm going to stop share, reshare real quick because that's how we do. All right. Well, I am just banging on all 8 cylinders this morning. Ta-da!
That's
Okay.
great, except you're a V12.
Yeah, well, that's a fun story too. Okay, so let's first talk about gates and expanders. So gates and expanders are they are blocks that are going to affect the signal's dynamic range below the threshold. So for instance, if I come in here and I say that I want to set a gate at negative 30 dB, any signal that is below negative 30 will not pass through the gate. So you can, I mean, the name gate, you can pretty much think of it like the gate on your fence. It's either open or it's closed. When it is closed, nothing gets through it. When it's open, it does. So this is what our gate looks like. The expander does a similar function, only it has a ratio and a soft knee that you can work with to sort of smooth out what it sounds like when it opens and closes. So the expander is a little less choppy. In the pro or in the live audio mixing world, if any of you dabble as front of house mixers or anything like that, um, you will know expanders have two versions. There are upward expanders and downward expanders. That's usually just on mixing consoles. In QSC, all of ours are just what would be called a downward expander, meaning that we are going to attenuate the signal when it's below the threshold. We do not amplify it once it's above the threshold. So gates and expanders are used to filter out the low-level sounds out of your final mix. If you have some static room noise from an AC or maybe a projector by your ceiling mic, you may just want to use a gate to keep that low-level noise from passing through. If you have multiple microphones that are close to each other, you can actually use an expander just to make sure that the closest signals are the only ones that enter the mix. Um, these are almost always used on the input side of the signal chain. So you can see in our little expand or our example here, we've got some audio coming in. We're running it through just a basic high pass, low pass para that we have, and then we would go into our gate or our expander. So the $1 million question is, which one am I supposed to use in which scenario? As with most things, when we're talking about audio processing and signal path and all of that, there really is no definitive answer. I can't tell you that 100% of the time you're going to want to use this to do this. Um, I highly recommend that you just work with the two blocks and start to hear what they sound like on the back side. If you want that smoother transition from open to close, then you would lean more toward an expander. If you want to use hold time, or if you want to see that the gate is open or closed, then that's where a gate comes in. The gate actually has a logic pin for whether it's open or it's closed. So if you need to use that to drive something elsewhere in your design, then a gate would be good for that. As you experiment with these blocks and sort of learn their differences, you'll be more comfortable in making that decision for yourself. The only thing I will tell you is don't use a gate and an expander in the same signal chain. This is like Highlander, there can be only one. Don't run them together. Okay, so let's take a look at this, shall we? I'm going to sort of zoom in here a little bit so we can see. Now, this is a designer file that I wrote specifically for this. It uses a bunch of audio players to sort of fake what it would be like to have stuff coming in and out. However,
Hi.
at the end
Hey,
of
Steve.
this, yes,
I just anonymous attendee had a question, and
go ahead.
before we get too far ahead here, is there a way to sidechain compressors or trigger with a source?
We do have side chains in our compressors. I don't really go over that because that is a super niche thing. I would say if you have questions about how that works, the help file entry under compressors does a really good job of walking through what our side chains are and how they work. But yes, you can side chain a compressor in Q-SYS.
I have one other question here from Jacob Collins. From a front of house side gate expander is before the EQ. From a block side, would you be able to have multiple mics going through one block, or would that consolidate all of the audio coming through it? Would it be better to have separate blocks, or one block for all? From a front of house side gate slash expander is before the EQ.
Um, you're gonna want to have a separate gate or expander for each source. I really would not recommend putting these like past on the backside of a mixer. That would start to give you some really, I mean, if that's what you're trying to do, then I would look at something like a gated auto mixer. Because that's literally what that does is it takes multiple sources and only puts out however many you want at a time based on their signal strength and then gates the rest of them. So yeah, if you're talking about doing multiple channels worth, then that's really where you start to get into a gated auto mixer. But if you don't want to do it that route, then I would say use an independent gate or expander per source.
And also, I mean, if you're new in the Q-SYS environment, these are not these are not heavy resource intensive blocks. So
No.
having 20, 30, 40 of them in a design is not detrimental. So, all right, we're clear.
Cool.
Thanks,
Moving
Steve.
along. Okay, so I want to show a little bit. We'll start with the gate here. So as you can see, so I'll turn my signal down. Now, what you're seeing here is that my signal is only coming in at, about -80, -50 at most. So therefore, my gate, I have applied -60 dB of gain because that is the depth that I have set this to. My threshold is here at -30. My attack time is 10 milliseconds. So 10 milliseconds after it goes above is when I will release this gate. I have a 1 second hold time in here, meaning that it's got to go back down for a second before I will actually shut the gate. We have our release time here. And again, we talked about how the detector time can be put into a user mode. So now this is a runtime property for me. So as this signal gets higher, what you will notice is, of course, it's going to be like a song change or whatever it is going on in here. So as this signal gets higher, and now I'm above my threshold, you'll see, first of all, I get that this is going to go. Oh, hang on. Let me put this in music. That's why that's acting all goofy. I had it on speech. Okay, so the open, you'll see this is now true. I have no applied gain. You will notice that this is dropping below the threshold. So because I have this 1 second hold time, if I turn this hold time all the way down, you'll notice that every time it drops even slightly below, let me see if I can get this to bounce right on the threshold. You can see that it's starting to dip on and off of applying gain. If you were in this room right now, you would actually start to hear that little chop to it. It would be bouncing around pretty good. This is why, I definitely like to put some kind of a hold time in it because now it's got to go down and be down for a second before I'm going to let that gate shut. So this is why, proper gain structure, making sure you've got some fail safes in place here in terms of a hold time. Say I only wanted this gate to shut to 20. That's fine. Now, as I close this down, you'll notice that this starts to move, and the max attenuation I can give this is -20. So that there may be a scenario where you don't want it to turn all the way off. You just want it to turn down when it gets below a certain amount. So that's what you can adjust by controlling this depth. Same thing with the threshold. Maybe I need to turn my threshold up to -20 and I want to know if it's above -20. So now I can use this and I got to give it a good amount of gain to make sure that I break that gate open. So that is how the gate works. So now let's look at that from its partner, the expander. So in this expander, you will notice that we have our same things, but we've got our threshold, our depth. Now we have a soft knee. So a soft knee of 10 means that this signal is going to roll in starting at 5 dB below our threshold, which is -20. So at -25, it's going to start rolling up, and then it will reach its max at -15 because we're telling it 5 above and 5 below. So you can see where this is coming in and out because we're sitting pretty much right on our threshold. So if I turn this down, you'll notice that we have all of our applied gain again. If this turns up and stays up, we'll have our negative applied gain over here. Now, the one thing you'll notice that we're missing in an expander is the hold time. So we don't have hold time in an expander. So this is why you've got to be pretty careful. Maybe that threshold needs to come down just a little bit so we're not chopping at a good gain. But these are the kind of things that you'll need to be aware of so that when you're listening to this on the back side, that you're not getting a lot of chop in here. All right, we can also play with our release time a little bit. So if we turn that release time up, this can help function similar to a hold time in that you'll notice that it's going below the threshold at times, but we're not just instantly applying negative gain to it. So it's going to take a while for it to get to the point, and you can see it when I just slam it down. So now it's like a second. It's going to take a while for that to get all the way down to where we want it to be. So this is a way, our attack time is still really quick, but we can use our release time. I'll just give it like a second and a half. And this means that it'll just, it's not exactly like a hold time because a hold time will hold the level steady and then it'll drop. Whereas the release time means it'll just fade out. So it's a little bit different than the hold time. However, you can use it to help smooth out the response of your expander when you go below that threshold. All right, any questions on the compressor or the expander? The compressor and the expander before I move on.
I
Okie dokie.
see none in the queue.
Sorry, the gate and the expander.
Just random work, whatever.
Okay. Gate and expander. Got it. Okay, good to go.
We had
Now
one.
we're going to talk about
Explain the
compressor.
detector time in more detail, please.
Oh, okay. So the detector time, this is how long it takes. And I'll kind of go back through here for a second. Um, the the detect time is really what we are looking for. This is like a delay essentially. So when the signal goes above or below the threshold, um, this is the amount of time that we're going to wait before we put the block into action. So in this case, we're at 5 milliseconds. We're saying, all right, as soon as that thing goes above or below, we want to know, or we want to go ahead and get at it with, at 5 milliseconds. So the thing to be careful of with the delay is that the delay works both directions. So if you're talking about looking at a gate and you set a detector time, now granted, it only goes up to 100 milliseconds. So that's the first part of it. But say you have it set to 100 milliseconds. That means someone has to be talking above that threshold for 100 milliseconds before it's actually going to open. I realize that a tenth of a second doesn't sound like a lot, but if someone starts talking into a microphone, you're likely going to cut off the beginning of what they're saying if you have this maxed at 100 milliseconds. So that's why it comes at 5. You could even turn it even farther down to 0.1. But it's all very quick. But as you start to lengthen that, if you're talking about, especially if you're talking about speech, you want to make sure that you're not putting so much delay in there that you're cutting off the first part of what they're saying. So, does that answer the question?
I think so.
Good to go. Okay. So let's now talk about compressors and limiters. Um, the the first two blocks that we looked at, the gate and the expander, those are in place to affect the signal's dynamic range when it is below a threshold, right? We're putting negative gain, we're attenuating that signal when it goes below a threshold. A compressor and a limiter, those are here to affect it when it is above a set threshold. These are very commonly used both on the input side and the output side. The limiter is pretty much just a hard stop to increase the gain. Once that signal hits that threshold, it will not get any louder. The attack and release times will determine how quickly that block works. You can think of this as the inverse of a gate, where the gate is just open or it's closed. That is how the limiter works. The compressor, on the other hand, now we get ratio, we get a soft knee. This is the opposite of our expander, expander, compressor. So this is going to say, if I have my ratio set to 4, for every 4 dB that I go above the threshold of that compressor, I will only get 1 dB to my output. So obviously, if you get down to a ratio of 1, then for every 1 that comes in, 1 goes out. That's just a straight line. So you're going to use things like the ratio, your threshold level, the depth, things like that you're going to get into, the soft knee. All of that is going to be used on a compressor. So first, let's talk about how this can be used on the input side. So here we are again. Say this is a microphone, and I've got my high pass, low pass parametric, and then I'm running that into a compressor. So you can use the compressor to do the first bit of controlling the dynamic range. So if somebody gets on that mic and starts really screaming, as they get louder and louder and louder, you don't necessarily want to give them one-to-one on after a certain point. You want to just sort of roll them off a little bit. This is also very useful if you have people bringing in outside audio sources into your system. You may have zeroed it out on a particular piece of equipment. They bring something in that has a lot more gain to it coming in. So you want to make sure that they can't just completely go bananas on it. So we'll go through, we'll put a compressor in. That'll do our first stage. And then we'll put a limiter behind it. So this is the, in case of emergency break glass block, where it's like, yeah, we want a nice smooth transition up to a point, and then we're just going to cut you off. So that's where the limiter comes into play. So this is like analog input processing. When we talk about digital output processing, so if we're talking about CXQs, the new MPAQs, the SPAQs, all of those are our digital amplifiers. If you're using those with our Q-SYS speaker blocks on it, those have limiters built into them based on the amplifier and the speaker that you've attached to it. We do all that math and set a limiter inside of that. So you do not need to put a second limiter in there. You can still put the compressor in. In fact, it's generally recommended. We put compressors in stuff all the time. And then we just let the limiter that's built into the amplifier handle the rest of it. But if we're talking about an analog output signal, we may be looking at post our EQ. So we want to have manipulated the signal as much as we're going to. And then right before we hit our line output, that's where we'll put our compressor and our limiter in place. So let's take a look at these as they really run. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my compressor. So you will notice I have a threshold of -12. I'm running a ratio of 4, meaning that for every 4 dB I go above -12, I will only allow 1 dB to go through. My depth is set to 60. My soft knee is 10. So again, as we've discussed, that means my compressor will start to roll off at -16. It will be fully rolled off by the time we get to -17 to -7. And you can see that on the graph here. So this point is talking about the ratio of 4, so you can see what it looks like. If I change this knee, you'll notice that the point smooths out. So if I go to a knee of 24, That means now I'm affecting 12 above and below. So I'm going to put my knee back in at 12-ish. Again, with the depth. So this is just how much can we do. If I take this to 0, this is now just a 1-to-1. This is how much can we negatively, or how much can we attenuate. And again, as you move your threshold around, this will begin to affect. So maybe I want to have a, like I was, -12 is when I want to start rolling this signal off. So if we look at this, as I keep getting louder and louder and louder and louder, my input side is coming in at, +5 at times, yet my output side is barely reaching -10. So we are doing a heavy amount of gain attenuation on here. So you can see it right here. This is what's coming in. This is what's coming out. So we are doing a really good job of smoothing this out and keeping ourselves from getting blown out of the water by whatever this is. So let me also now show you how the limiter works. So the limiter, again, fewer controls because this is just a hard stop. So if I dial this out, we're just going to chop this signal down. I'm going to say if I have a threshold of -5, this is saying I never want this signal to get to be higher than -5. And you can see it. We're coming in super hot, +10, +12, and yet we're consistently staying way down below that. So we're applying a ton of negative gain out of this limiter. This is what you will see happen quite a bit. Now we have a compressor that's doing the work before it gets to the limiter, which means the limiter is not having to do as much work. One thing that I will point out, and we bring this up a lot um, in some of the classes where we're talking about compressors and limiters. These are really there to make sure that spikes and surges in the signal level don't get out of control and start clipping or distorting your signal. Whereas gates and expanders are almost exclusively used as input processing, compressors and limiters can really be used as both input or output processing. And you will likely see a lot of people run compressors with limiters behind them. So if you're talking about input side processing, this can be used in speech scenarios to help you smooth out loud talkers versus quiet talkers, protect against sudden input spikes. I have a story that I've told several times about a big nightclub that I did. We got a phone call there on a Monday morning saying that all of their speakers were blown, and we did not do the original install for what it's worth. We just got called on this one. And basically, the DJ had maxed his mic out on the board and went to put it away and dropped it on the table. And they did not have any sort of compressor or limiter in place. And it just went straight through and blew every speaker in the entire club. So that is where compressors and limiters really will help you, is to try to keep sudden shocks from going all the way through the system as well.
The limiter is a lot of times a good if you have an analog amp or recording device or something downstream, and maybe it's not pro level, right? So it's not peaking at plus 24 dBu or at 0 dB full scale. So you want to limit things that are downstream that might be coming in, have an unbalanced input or a consumer device or any of that as well. Bill Gordon has a question. In the compressor block, I'm guessing, I have the detector meter, but no detector time adjust block. Running 10.0.0, am I missing something? And yeah, Bill, actually it's a property. So whenever you drag the component into Q-SYS Designer, you'll want to go over to the properties pane, and the detector time by default is set to 5 milliseconds. It has choices of 5, 10, 20, and 50, or use control. So if you select use control in the properties, it will pop that detector time control into there. So just wanted to, I prefer to answer live unless we just get so many
I got you.
questions. Then everybody hears them, at least here's the answer.
No, I mean that pretty much wraps up compressors and limiters. So if we have any other questions before we dive into AGCs and CACs,
Can we throw a few more TLAs in there?
I can be the OWCA,
Okay.
that you know, the MOUSE, a lot of alphabet soup,
MOUSC.
a lot of alphabet soup going on in here.
I gotcha. And James Cargill has a question here, but he's asking if we have time at the end to talk about a priority ducker. He'd like to do that. So I'm just gonna put a pin
Oh,
in that, and when we get to the end, if we've got it and he wants to hang, we can probably
sure.
touch on that. So
The Raging Cajun? Did you say James Cargo?
James
Cargill?
Cargill.
Oh,
Cargill.
Cargill, not Carville. Sorry.
Oh,
Am I the only one who knows who James Carville is? Okay.
you might be.
All right. Good enough.
Somebody raised their hand. So
Jason, are you raising your hand because you know who James Carville is, or did you have a question? Hopefully, it's because I'm not the only person in here who knows who James Carville is. Okay. All right.
we could have
Moving
talked
right
about a
along.
priority ducker in that amount of time.
I know, right? Okay.
Jason says he does live in Baton Rouge. So
Well, there you go. And then he certainly knows who that is. Perfect. Okay, so let's talk about these are two of my favorite blocks. These are blocks that I hear about from people all the time, that they don't like to use them because they are scary. That is somewhat true. They can be, especially AGC. But I am going to give you, my 20 some odd years of experience all wrapped up into about 3 minutes that will hopefully make the AGC not nearly as scary to you. Um, okay, so an AGC, automatic gain compensation, or automatic gain control, depending on who you're talking to. What this is going to do is this is actually going to add or subtract gain based on your threshold level. So when you set that threshold level, this is where we're going to say, okay, my AGC is going to become active at this level, -20, for example. You want to make sure that whatever this level is, you are well above your noise floor and any background noise that you might have in the room. So how this is going to work is when the input exceeds that threshold, the gain will be adjusted based on what you've set at as your target level. So in this example that we have -20 as our threshold, but our target level is actually -15. So we're saying, okay, we would like for this signal to stay as close to -15 as possible. Once we hit -20, we will attempt to apply gain until our signal gets to -15. Once we get above -15, we will attempt to apply negative gain to get us back to -15. So we have a ratio in here. It is the same concept as the others. Whereas the lower the ratio, the more true you are to what's in is coming out. In a majority of instances, the ratio on an AGC is going to be 100 because what you're trying to do is you're saying, I want to, as close as humanly possible, stay at my target level. But you can adjust it as you play with it. It begins to act more like a compressor that has the ability to add gain as you start to turn that ratio down. But for our example, we will work with our 100 ratio automatic gain control. So I'm going to turn this on. Well, here, I'll show you an example of how this would work. I used a ton of these in my previous world. These are handy for things like cable and satellite boxes. If you're bringing one of those in, if you've ever done a sports bar or something like that, you will know that most of the channels are notorious for making the commercials louder than the actual event that you're watching. Also, as you go from channel to channel, the volumes may be different. This is a good way to help you sort of smooth that out. Again, be aware of how tight you set it because you don't want this thing to go crazy. Um, but it's good for that. It is great for wireless microphones in a room that's rented out because you never know if the person's going to hold the mic down here or bring it up here and be right on top of it. So this will help you smooth out some of those loud and quiet talkers. Um, you also have a couple of extra controls on here. Like you've got the hold time that we talked about earlier. You've got a response time. So how long does it take for the gain to get from its current level to a new level when there's been a change in the input signal? So this is basically slowing down the behavior of the block. It'll make everything a lot smoother as it goes up and down. If you are running a super short response time, you will notice the volume jumping up and down. That is generally not ideal, but a second, second and a half, that's usually pretty smooth. You want to ride a fine balance of being able to get the audio up from a low signal to being able to duck down or take some gain out of a super loud signal. So you'll have to find that fine line of response time. Same thing with recovery time. So the recovery time has to do with um, the time that it takes for the applied gain to return back to zero. You can also turn on and off the recovery enable. So you have this recovery enable. That is going to determine whether or not the hold time and the recovery time is actually applied. So you can turn that off and it will just run itself as quickly as it possibly can, or you can turn that on and give yourself a way to lengthen out some of those gain transitions. The biggest thing to understand about AGC, this is not a cure-all, nor will it solve every problem you're going to have in these big dynamic swings of a signal. What it can do is help you smooth out some of the peaks and valleys and try to keep your customers from having to run over somewhere and turn something up 1 dB, 2 dB, 3 dB, all the time having to make these little adjustments. Again, these are great for TV inputs, background music players. If you've ever had to deal with some of those, you know that those can those are very rarely what is the term where they're very rarely flattened out so that the every song is the same volume. This can help with that. The critical part of this is it lies right here in this control called maximum gain. So when you're dealing with this, you will be able to remove as much gain as you want. However, this maximum gain is super important. This is what's going to keep it from running away and getting so loud that on its own that people begin to get annoyed with you. So, um, you know, I have used a ton of these. I think about 4 dB is probably the most I've ever gone on one of these. Generally, it's even closer to around 3, where I'm just trying to create a little bubble. So, for example, I've got my threshold, I've got my target level, um, and I will only allow it to have 4 dB because otherwise the thing's just going to get wild and start running away with itself. Okay, let's take a look at how this looks when it's working. So I'm going to bring up my AGC. I have a bunch of program material here. So what you'll notice, because my threshold, sorry, I'll zoom in on this a little bit more again. Because my threshold is negative 30, my signal needs to be at least negative 30 before this thing will even consider trying to do anything. My target level, though, is negative 15. This is where I'm trying to stay. That would be this dot right here. This is my ratio, so I can change this. If I turn this down, you'll notice that this arm starts moving. If I turn this back up to 100, now we're saying we're trying to stay as close to this as possible. So what you'll see, so I'm going to put this in a speech environment now, and I've got somebody who's talking, right? So I'm going to turn this up a bit. Now, because I am routinely staying somewhere in the negative 20 department, I am applying gain, but it will never go above +4. Now, if I dial this up, say my guy gets super aggressive here, you'll notice that I can take out as much as I need to try to get back to negative 15. But I'll never be able to apply more than 4. So this is where an AGC, especially coupled with some proper gain structure, can be really powerful. And again, with the hold time and the recovery time, if I just slam this down, you'll notice we're going to hold for 2 seconds. And then over the course of 5 seconds, this is going to reset itself back to 0 applied gain. The reason you do this is because, especially if you're dealing with people who are speaking, and if you've got somebody like me, I got a big, loud voice. I have been accused of this my entire life. Dan will attest to it. If you've ever had to be in the room next to me at a trade show while I am presenting, I have gotten all of the complaints in the world. If you have somebody that's got a big voice and they're talking into a microphone and they talk into it properly, like it is right there, and they may be running on the negative side of this, but if you set these hold and these recovery times, if I take a break, I got to cough for a second, and then I start talking again, my applied gain will be the same. You're not having to then restart from 0 when I start talking again. Because if you don't have these set and I start talking again and that thing has already reset itself back to 0, now we got to wait for our response time and all of that for me to come back down to earth a little bit. So definitely use those depending on the scenario. Again, they're just going to help you smooth out that signal. It's not going to fix everything, but it will help you smooth out the signal. I will now pause for what I can only imagine are many questions over this topic.
Aaron Darnell says, accused of this would imply that it's not true.
That is correct. Aaron knows as well as anyone. Perhaps I should use the phrase correctly pointed out.
There you go. All right. Nothing popping in at this moment though, but that's
seriously.
Fine. Yeah.
I have
Such a great job of describing.
I have so adeptly explained the automatic gain control. I have demystified.
Or you put everybody to sleep. One of the two.
That is always possible.
And you kind of do have that, forensic files guy kind of voice,
Oh, Keith Morrison? I'd rather be Keith Morrison. Well, that must have been wild.
All right.
Okay.
Now the continuous ambient compensator.
The very last one, the continuous ambient compensator. All right. So let's take a look at how we would use this. The CAC it requires information. So very much like the AEC, the acoustic echo cancellation, we need some sort of a reference. So what the CAC is going to do is it's going to take your program material coming in. It's going to take a microphone signal that's coming into it. So this is going to be what we're going to use to do our detecting. And then we need a reference for it. So the CAC works in very much the same way as an AEC does. When we're doing acoustic echo cancellation, that's essentially what we're doing in here, only we are coupling that with an in-room microphone and we're giving it that information. So let us imagine that we have a factory floor and we have tons of equipment that's running. But we also have a paging system where we need to be able to page people and make announcements. So the page, what I'm going to say, that is my program material. I have microphones that are placed at different places in the factory. They are going to use that information um, to tell me what my noise floor is to make sure that I'm above it. So that is what we call, God damn, why did my brain just, what's the one called where you don't use music?
Oh, gating ambient compensator.
Gating ambient compensator. Okay. So
I
that's the
had looked away and
gating.
I'm like, man, he sounds like he's talking about a gating
I
compensator.
am. So that is the gating ambient compensator. The continuous compensator is the one that involves program material. My apologies. The example I meant to give is where I actually used to use a lot of continuous ambient compensators, and that is a casino floor. I did a lot of casinos in my day. We used tons of ambient compensators for this, where we would put microphones on the walls or on the ceilings over different areas of the casino floor. So we've got music that's pumping in, right? That's my program material. We've got um, our microphones that we have, and then our reference is telling us what's coming out in that actual room so that we can filter what is people making noise versus what is stuff that we are actually pumping into that area. Okay. So I've got all of this going on. I'm playing my music, and all of a sudden I get a bachelorette party that's going to come over and play at the craps table. And it's 3 in the morning. So my music is generally not very loud at this time of night. But here comes the bachelorettes from Des Moines. They've never been to Vegas before. They are having a grand time. And everyone in the casino knows they are having a grand time because they are super loud. So what my CAC is going to do is those microphones are going to suddenly pick up that there is now a raise in our noise floor. The noise being the bachelorettes. That will then let us turn our music up slightly so that we can still hear our music over the bachelorette party. Now, again, this is going to be one of those times where maximum gain and minimum gain come into play. If you mess those up, especially maximum gain, you will find yourself climbing the ladder, as I call it, until everyone is just screaming at each other. If I'm playing music and some people come in and they're talking, so I turn my music up a little bit, well, they really want to talk to each other. So now they're going to talk a little louder, and now my music's going to get louder, and they're going to get louder. And the next thing you know, they're screaming at each other over, 103 dB of music. So we want to make sure that in these maximum gain settings, so here's what you're going to notice. I have some program material. This will be my music. I also have some people talking. This is just a background noise track. So what you can see right now is that we're taking about 4 dB out because the people aren't being very loud. So as I make my people get louder, you'll notice that my detector level is going up. So now my music is turning itself up. Now I have this thing set for 5 seconds on attack and release and a 5 second detector time, meaning that I've got this slowed way down because I don't want anything sudden to make this change. However, If I crank this all the way out, now we've got our bachelorette party, right? Oh man, they are really killing it. One of them learned that you can play against the come line, and she is just crushing craps. But all I'm ever allowing this thing to do is go to 5 dB of gain. No matter how loud they get, I am not topping 5 dB of gain. This is going to keep me from having that runaway situation where the music just keeps getting louder and louder and they just keep screaming. So the CAC is really good for areas where you're going to have a variable noise floor, and then you need to make adjustments based on that variable noise floor. So now you can see I turned my bachelorette party down, and slowly but surely we are releasing some of that gain. And if I get to the point where I have barely any background noise, you will also notice that I cannot go past -5 of applied gain. So even as they get quieter and quieter and quieter, you can see that my detector keeps going down, but I'm capped out at applying -5 dB of gain. So as we have fluctuations on our floor, this is heavily used in airports, train stations, hotel lobbies, casino floors, places like that. This is heavily used. Okay.
Yeah,
Questions?
there's no questions in the queue, but while we're waiting for a few to get in there, I always tell people this, you don't use this. If you don't use this block a lot, there is some stuff up in the detector section there that talks about there's a pin up on the block that you don't really wire to anything, but it's called the ambient out. And what that is that's telling you how good of a subtractive process is happening, right? If you're doing AEC, you have somebody on the far end go, oh, you hear an echo. But here you hover over that and you can see if all you should be hearing out of that ambient out pin is the ambient noise of the room, not the program audio, because we're subtracting that out. And so that way we know we're actively evaluating that. Kevin Elliott has a question that says mic speaker distance. Well, that's actually from whatever microphone that you're using for this, what is the closest loudspeaker? So that's going to help kind of determine, if I'm going to go back to AEC a little bit, kind of the response time of the room, or how it's going to use that in the algorithm is going to use that in calculating that. So that the mic speaker distance, and it's in metric, but no problem. My 7th grade science teacher in 83 said by the time I graduate high school, the entire United States would metric. So it should happen any day. But that's what the mic speaker distance is how close you are. The microphone that you're using as the microphone input, how close is that to the nearest loudspeaker? So we have a question here from James Cargill that says, would the CAC be used to increase the level of overhead paging, etc., fire alarms? That's probably more the gating ambient
Yeah.
compensator. But if all you're doing is paging, right? So
Yeah, if you're in a scenario where you don't have background music, that's the gating ambient compensator. However, in my experience, what I was running through the CAC was usually music mixed with paging, so it's controlling that overall level. So as my floor gets louder, then yes, it's going to bring up my pages, any messaging that I've got. All of that comes together because you're putting this pretty much right before the output of the speaker block or of the amplifier, whatever it is. So
yeah,
this goes pretty deep in the chain. So it's really just whatever you've got coming out of those speakers, that's what's going to get adjusted with the CAC.
I key in on the first word of the CAC, continuous, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
there's something continuously playing, like Steve said, you've got a light background music and you're hitting that, you've got light background music and you're paging over the top of that, then you'd want to use the continuous. If you're just doing paging, that's where you want to do the gated ambient compensator. So cool. Proper gain structure, AEC, dynamics, auto, gain share mix, AGC is the proper arrangement there. So let's see. Automatic gain share mix.
That really depends on what you're doing with the AGC. If you've got, oh, okay, sure. I mean, I wouldn't put the AGC before the mixer. I wouldn't put it after the mixer. I would actually put it before the mixer, and I would have one for every source coming in, so that it's unique to that particular input source, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a way of kind of maintaining your proper gain structure, right? You set your input gain. We want to ensure that we're staying in a certain range so that all the downstream mixing we do is got the same. So, yep. We'll see if any other questions drop in, but do you have a few minutes to
Yeah, let
briefly just,
me
are you
let's
putting
just
together a little something there?
go through this real quick like.
All right.
So we were talking, we had a question about the priority ducker. Now, the good news is, and I don't have anything there I can actually show this because I didn't prep this. Um, a lot of what we've just talked about as far as attack time, detector time, all of this stuff all applies. The example that the person gave when they were asking, and this is actually something that I've done a ton. If you have ceiling mics in a room and you have handheld mics or wireless mics, and you're using them in a conferencing application, if somebody talks on the wireless, you want to make sure that they don't get picked up, or that the ceiling mic doesn't go out to the far end at the same time, or you'll get some very weird echoey coupling that is just awful. So we do this quite a bit where we will run the wireless mics through as the priority of a ducker, where we will mix the ceiling mics together, mix the wireless mics together, and then run them through a ducker so that what the far end gets is just whichever one. If the wireless mics aren't on, then it'll always just be the ceiling mics. Um, in that instance, I would say, obviously, you're just trying to keep your gain calculation. You definitely want to raise the depth, because you want to make sure those ceiling mics do not get through at all. Um, and again, your attack and release times are actually going to be pretty quick in a scenario like that, because you don't care if that thing snaps open and shut. It's not that big of a deal, because really you're just switching from one microphone in a room to another microphone in a room. So it's not as big of a deal as you might think. Um, you may want to put a little bit of hold time in, but not a ton, because what you want to avoid is if somebody's been talking on the mic and somebody asks a question in the room and they stop talking on the mic, you want to make sure that you get that ceiling mic back in as quickly as possible. So I would be very stingy with uh, things like release times, hold times. I would say start those way down and only increase them if you feel like you're not getting what you want to the far end. Does that answer the question?
I have I have not, that's a great use case for that. And I've been managing people and processes for the
Yeah.
last 3 to 4 years, so I haven't been dealing with a lot of in the field stuff. Thank you. I learned something today, Steve, and thanks for the
Yeah, I
question,
mean,
James.
it
I
is a
totally get
scenario.
how a Ducker works, but like that use case of it was is it makes sense. So, and maybe James inherited that design or something, and it's like, why is someone doing this? So
Yeah, no,
totally.
it makes sense. And like I said, we do this quite a bit.
Yeah,
So,
he said he especially had to play with the whole time. We would have presenters who would pause mid-sentence. So yeah, I guess you got to think about that. You just put a
uh,
sign on the microphone, little banner on the
yeah,
microphone that says, You must talk continuously without, pausing for greater than 200 milliseconds. It's like the touch panel that says touch here to wake up touch panel. So
Yeah.
all of a sudden the ceiling mics would fly back up. Yep,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yep. That's the thing. All right. Well, I've kept you guys about an extra 8 or 9 minutes. After this, you will receive an email within the next week or so from our marketing department. It will contain a recording of this video as well as some of the assets that I've used here. As usual, we are all available, first name dot last name at qsc.com. So if you ever need any of us as a follow-up, please feel free to reach out or to your local application engineer. Thank you all so much for coming out. This has been a blast. It's the first one of these I've done in a while. So thank you all.
Last May. So
Jeez,
on this
that's
topic,
crazy.
yeah.
I know you
Priest
guys
missed.
missed me. So I appreciate everyone taking the time, and we will see you guys on the flip side.
Yeah, next week or the 24th is best practices in gain structure. And then we've got in March some teed up on a new one on how to choose the right Q-SYS core processor with the come out of the X10 and the X20 and all that. We got our marketing manager said, "Hey, can we get some time in there to do that?" So we'll be doing that one. Plus part two of Skip Mussett's CSS work that if he did back in January, part one of. So this one's kind of some advanced CSS techniques. And then at the end of March, if you heard about our room suite design, our room suite product line, we're going to be doing a deep dive webinar on how that works and what that is. So a little bit there. So some great things come up. I imagine in the next 2 weeks, you'll see the March dates out there get posted, but I'm just kind of giving you a little foreshadowing. So thank you again, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.